we just finished talking about adjustment layers. Now let's go into some of the tools that allow us to help modify an image at a pixel level, such as our healing and cloning brushes. From the image we had available, and you can keep any image open, it doesn't really matter. The first thing we want to do is talk about what it is that the healing brush and cloning brush are, where they're located. As we did in our shortcuts tutorial, or keyboard shortcuts, I changed mine to A with the healing brush, which is right here, the healing brush, and the clone stamp tool, which is the clone brush. For me, the healing brush is A, the clone stamp tool is S. So I'm going to be using A and S interchangeably. I won't be going back to the tools again. So we're going to start with the clone brush. The clone brush is basically a tool that allows you to copy and paste information. By default, I'll show you how this works. Let's say we take the clone brush, the clone stamp tool, which is S, and I want to remove this flyaway. I'll zoom in with Z, go back to my clone brush, and the way to do this with photos is we take a piece of the background and we cover it up with what we want to remove. And this is where the clone stamp tool really comes into effect. Once you have the clone stamp tool selected, we're going to be using Option or Alt to sample the area we want to copy and where we want to paste. So let's say we sample the background, we hold Alt, we click once on the background, we let go of Alt, we come over this flyaway, then we click again and we start brushing. As you see now, there are two things that are happening. The flyaway is being removed, but at the same time there is a plus sign on the screen. The plus sign indicates exactly where it's being copied from, and our cursor indicates where it's pasting. You can think about like a copy and paste brush. And the undo feature also works with the clone stamp tool as well. So Option Command Z goes back and I can do it again. It also works if I sample from anywhere else. So let's say I sample from the hair here and paste it on the background. You can see that I am copying from the hair and pasting it in the background. Although I don't want to actually do this, it gives you a good example of what's happening. And I'll undo that. Now we don't actually want to be doing this on top of the image itself or on a layer. We want to do it on another layer, another blank layer, so that if we want to undo it, we can easily erase it, we can mask it out, and we have a lot of other options. So I'll select the new layer, have my clone stamp enabled. I'll select current and below. By default, whenever I select or source by hitting Option and the area that I want to select or copy, it's going to follow around with this little preview of what's being copied over to give you a good indication of what's happening. What I personally recommend is with the clone brush, pressure is also enabled. So just like a brush, go under Window and Brush and make sure that Shape Dynamics is unchecked. Now I'll close that out. The next part is if you work on a new layer, you have to be sure that the sample says current and below. What that means is it samples everything that's on the below layers as well as the current layers and then pastes it on the layer that is active. So no matter how many different layers you have underneath, it's going to sample everything. The visible view of what we're seeing right now, it's going to sample all of that and then use that information and paste it on a blank layer. So for instance, if I do the same thing where I take my background, sample that, and remove that flyaway, it pastes it on this new blank layer. So when I turn the background off and just have this blank layer visible, you'll notice that the information is on that blank layer. So like I said, you want to be sure that Kern and Below is enabled, and you are using Alt or Option to sample whatever it is that you want to copy, and then use that information to paste somewhere else by clicking down over that area you want to paste. So that is the clone brush. You know, it doesn't have something special. It doesn't change based on anything. It copies and it pastes, literally. Now there's also different views with the clone brush. For instance, if I delete that, add a new layer, and change this blend mode to darken, what will happen is, say for instance, I sample something that's lighter than where I'm pasting. As you can see, even though I am pasting, nothing is happening because the destination is lighter. When it is set to darken, it's only going to paste and modify information if it darkens it. So for example, I can take, say, the color of the hair and then brush in the background because the background's lighter, so it's going to darken it. However, if I take that same hair and paste it over here where it's darker, it's not going to paste it because the destination is already darker than where I started sampling from. This is very useful in situations where you have maybe flyaways. You can sample the hair here and paste it. So what will happen is it'll remove the flyaway without actually pasting on the rest of the hair because the rest of the hair is about the same darkness. But that flyaway was much brighter. So it got rid of the flyaway without affecting most of the other areas. Again, because it's on a blank layer, I can quickly erase this. I can use my eraser tool, which is here, and then simply just erase the part of the layer that I don't want, or mask it out, depending on whichever you choose. So the same thing goes for other parts of the image. Because it's in darken, I can quickly just remove it without worrying about it pasting all over the hair. So that basically goes over most of the uses for the clone brush. You can use it for flyaways, you can use it for spots and things like that, or different object removal. You can also combine them with masks. So if I have a new layer, if I say sample the background, and I start pasting all over the hair, let's say that it went too far inside the hair. I can use a mask if I don't want to erase it, and then erase it that way. So in case I go too far and I say, oh, I want to actually bring it back and I want to go that far off into the background, I can swap over to white, start pasting again until it's perfect. I can change my flow setting and be very gentle with it, so only a few flyaways show up, change it back to white and hide it again. Makes it very easy to paste and then mask to remove things. The same thing goes for other parts of the image. I can select the layer itself, not the mask, use my clone brush, sample the background, paste along the hairline, go to my mask, select the brush tool, use black, and quickly just edge back some of the hair that's taken out. Just really refine that and get it perfect. So you start with a general selection. Because a mask, you can easily refine that to make something perfect. In case the selection isn't perfect, you can go in and select another area, paste it. Because a mask is already there, blocking the hair, it's not going to paste over the hair again because the mask is here. Now let's talk about the healing brush. The healing brush is a little bit different. For example, if I take my clone brush and I decided to remove this flyaway on the hair, on the forehead, if I sampled on a darker part of the skin and pasted, you notice that it just copies and pastes, so it doesn't do anything intelligent. The difference is if I have my healing brush, again, making sure it says current and below, because it's a different setting since we're on a different brush, I can sample, and now when I start painting, it actually removes that flyaway, except this time, it doesn't just paste. What it does is it figures out how bright the destination is of where you're pasting. And it'll remove that item without making it darker. So it compensates for it. The main difference with the healing brush and the clone brush is that the clone brush just copies and pastes. The healing brush doesn't just paste, it removes the object but also figures out how bright or dark should I change the destination. So whenever you're actually brushing, it not only pastes but then changes the luminosity of what you've just copied to match the surrounding area. This is why whenever we're working on blemishes, we use a healing brush and simply copy and paste over the area as long as it has similar texture. Now, this is very important because if you sample somewhere really far away from the blemish, you'll notice that the texture will change. And you want to be sure that even though the luminosity is the same, you want to copy over texture that's quite reasonably similar to where you're pasting, because it's not going to figure that out unless you decide to sample and paste accordingly. The main difference between the Creative Cloud version of the healing brush from 2014 onwards is the fact that before, what used to happen was when I sample and as I start brushing, you'll notice that it starts healing right away, which is why you're not getting indication of what's being highlighted first. It just starts healing immediately. No matter what I do, it starts healing. This is called the live healing brush. Before, what used to happen if you have a previous version is it waits for you to finish brushing and then it heals. So keep that in mind as I'm working through this and understand that although the end result may be a little bit different, the actual processing is pretty much identical. The key thing to remember is if you're going to be removing a blemish or a strand of hair or something like that, make sure you cover it entirely before letting go of your mouse or for each stroke. Don't do multiple strokes. Do one stroke, cover it completely, and then let go. Also, the healing works with the same way with a clone brush that we use our darken or lighten modes. We can change it to lighten or darken and work accordingly. For my purpose, I always leave it at normal and then just use a good source to start brushing. So again, I'll just sample across the skin, cover the entire strand of hair, and then let go. And as long as you do that, and you don't cover just half of the hair, just like I did here, it'll work quite nicely. So again, with one sample, don't let go of your pen or your cursor or your mouse and just cover the entire area like a bandage before you let go. And you'll have really good results as you're working. The only time the healing brush won't work really well is if you are too close to an edge. It'll start making this little blotchy area. They have this diffusion tab where if you set it to 1, it's supposed to be a little bit better, which it does an okay job. However, there's no substituting just being careful. If you're at an edge, switch over to your clone brush, or if you're working on the skin in a flat area, use your healing brush. I prefer to keep my hardness at 0, and the same thing goes for my clone brush for most of the time. If there's an edge like this, maybe having a hardness higher would be advantageous, but because our brush sizes are so small, it doesn't really impact a lot. If you're cutting things out with a mask, maybe having a clone brush with a higher hardness will be better for you. But for me personally, I tend to keep everything at a lower hardness. A really cool tip about the healing brush is that, let's say you decide to remove this and you say that you want to fade that back just a bit in case you want something in between. You can fade just your last stroke by going to Edit, Fade Healing Brush, and changing the fade from 100% from 0 to 100%. So you can pick something in between. And this will only work for your last stroke, so it doesn't change the opacity of every single stroke that you've done, but it changes it just for that area. Another way to do that is, let's say that we heal something. You can take the eraser brush, change your flow low, and then just quickly go over that section, and that'll gently fade that area that you healed as well. So those are two options in case you want to remove something but not completely. Same thing goes for red lines in the eyes, anything like that. So we basically talked about the differences in the healing and cloning brush. The cloning brush being something that copies and pastes automatically. Most of the time you want to remember, use a blank layer, make sure your healing brush and cloning brush are set to current and below, and use them sparingly. You don't have to use them everywhere on the skin. It's just certain areas you have problems with or certain flyaways, and knowing when to use what. So for example, different background areas and different issues account for the cloning brush, where spots on the skin and everything that's more texture related is the healing brush. I would suggest, if there's any blemish you're trying to remove, stick to the healing brush. If there's certain things that are almost impossible to get rid of with the healing brush, switch over to the cloning brush. When you know the difference between the two, it becomes really easy to use both of them, especially when you combine them with flow and opacity. Now that we talked about a couple of these tools, we're going to go on to editing the toolbar itself.